$105 or $70 for silver. That's the kind of moment where markets stop whispering and start speaking loudly. When price sits at a crossroads like this, the question isn't just about numbers on a chart. It's about pressure building under the surface of the financial system. At the same time, billions are flowing into gold, and global headlines talk about tensions, cyber threats, and even the possibility of data centers becoming targets. When you connect those dots, you begin to see something bigger than a simple commodity trade. You see a world where money, technology, and geopolitics are colliding, and the signals coming from the precious metals market are becoming impossible to ignore. Think about the title for a moment. $105 or $70, a huge silver move. That kind of range tells you one thing immediately. The market is preparing for volatility, not chaos necessarily, but a decisive move. When a market compresses between two powerful forces, supply and demand, optimism and fear, it behaves like a spring being wound tighter and tighter. Eventually that spring releases. Sometimes the release surprises everyone watching. At the same time, reports of billions flowing into gold reinforce the idea that something important is happening in the background of the global financial system. Gold has always acted like a thermometer for economic confidence. When large sums move toward it, people start asking deeper questions about stability, currency value, and long-term security. Now layer on the third piece of the title, geopolitical tension, and the idea that critical infrastructure like data centers could become strategic targets. Whether the headlines exaggerate or not, the mere discussion changes the psychology of markets. The modern world runs on data the same way previous centuries ran on oil, railways, or steel. When the systems that hold information, finance, and communication become part of global strategy conversations, investors begin thinking about resilience. They begin asking what assets historically held value when systems changed, when currencies shifted, or when uncertainty increased. And suddenly the conversation about silver and gold becomes less about speculation and more about historical patterns. If you step back and look at financial history, precious metals have often moved during moments when people were reassessing the future. That doesn't mean the move is always immediate, and it certainly doesn't mean outcomes are guaranteed. But it does reveal something about human behavior. When the world feels stable, attention moves toward growth assets, innovation, and expansion. When the world feels uncertain, attention often shifts toward things that have survived centuries of change. Silver is especially interesting because it sits in two worlds at once. It's both an industrial metal used in technology and energy systems, and a monetary metal that has served as money for thousands of years. That dual identity is part of why silver markets can become so dramatic when pressure builds. Consider the possibility that the market is currently debating two narratives at the same time. One narrative says the economy remains strong enough to keep industrial demand steady, but not strong enough to spark a massive rush into metals. That narrative might support lower price levels in the short term. The other narrative says structural forces are building, rising technology demand, energy transitions, geopolitical uncertainty, and the psychological role of precious metals in times of change. If that narrative begins to dominate, the market could move in a completely different direction. And when markets transition from one narrative to another, the move can feel sudden even though the ingredients were building for years. There's another dimension here that often goes unnoticed by casual observers. Financial markets are not only about numbers, they're about positioning. Large institutions, hedge funds, and global investors constantly adjust their expectations. Sometimes those expectations become crowded. When too many participants lean in one direction, markets can surprise them by moving the other way. That's part of why moments like 105 or 70 capture attention. They represent the idea that the market itself is deciding which story it believes. And once that decision happens, momentum can accelerate quickly. At the same time, the mention of billions moving into gold introduces another powerful concept: capital flow. Markets move not just because of opinions, but because of money shifting from one place to another. When billions move into a particular asset class, it's like watching a river change direction. You may not see the full impact immediately, but over time, that flow reshapes the landscape. Gold often acts as the anchor in the precious metals world. When attention flows there, it sometimes creates a ripple effect across related assets, including silver. That relationship doesn't always play out the same way, but historically, it has been one of the most fascinating dynamics in financial markets. And then there's the technology angle, the mention of data centers and cyber infrastructure. In the digital age, wealth, communication, and power are stored not only in vaults, but in servers and networks. If headlines start discussing those systems as strategic targets, it reminds people that the modern financial world is deeply interconnected. Digital systems are incredibly powerful, but they also depend on electricity, networks, and infrastructure remaining stable. Whenever discussions about those systems appear in global news, some investors naturally start thinking about diversification and resilience. This is where the mindset aspect becomes important. Markets are full of noise. Headlines appear every hour, predictions change every week, and emotions can swing quickly. But the most valuable skill in financial awareness is not predicting every move. It's learning how to interpret signals without reacting emotionally. When you hear a title like $105 or $70, the immediate temptation is to guess which one will happen. Yet the deeper lesson might be about understanding why the market is even having that debate. What pressures are building? What narratives are competing? What psychological forces are influencing decision makers around the world? Another powerful approach is learning to observe long-term cycles. Financial history shows that markets move through phases: accumulation, expansion, euphoria, and correction. Each phase feels permanent while it's happening, but eventually the cycle turns. Precious metals have gone through long periods where they were ignored, followed by periods where they captured global attention. Understanding those cycles doesn't mean predicting exact price levels, but it can help viewers recognize when sentiment is shifting. It's also helpful to think about silver as a bridge between different economic forces. On one side, you have technology, solar energy systems, electronics, and industrial applications that rely on silver's unique properties. On the other side, you have the psychological role of precious metals as stores of value. When those two forces align, the market can experience powerful momentum. When they diverge, the price can move sideways for long periods. Watching how those forces interact can be far more informative than focusing on short-term headlines alone. There's also a lesson here about awareness. Many people only start paying attention to markets when dramatic headlines appear. But by that point, much of the story has already been unfolding quietly. Supply trends, demand changes, policy shifts, and geopolitical developments often build slowly before they suddenly appear connected. The ability to observe those early signals is something every market learner can develop. It involves reading widely, thinking critically, and understanding that no single headline tells the entire story. Another mindset shift involves thinking about volatility differently. Most people view volatility as something negative, something to avoid. But volatility is also how markets express change. Without volatility, prices would never move enough to reflect new information. The key is not to fear volatility, but to understand what it represents. When a market approaches a crossroads like $105 or $70, volatility is simply the market deciding which path reflects reality more accurately. And perhaps the most important lesson from a title like this is about perspective. Financial headlines can make events feel immediate and urgent, but wealth awareness is usually built over long periods of observation and learning. Instead of asking, "What will happen tomorrow?" a more powerful question might be, "What patterns are forming over the next decade?" When you zoom out like that, the conversation about silver, gold, global capital flows, and technology infrastructure becomes part of a much bigger story about how the world is evolving. Because the truth is, markets are reflections of human behavior. Fear, optimism, innovation, and uncertainty all appear in price charts if you know how to look for them. Precious metals often act like mirrors reflecting the collective mood of the financial system. When confidence rises, they may fade into the background. When uncertainty grows, they often step back into the spotlight. So whether the market ultimately chooses $105 or $70 in the near term, the real value for viewers lies in understanding the forces behind the debate. It's about recognizing how global events, capital flows, technological infrastructure, and human psychology interact in ways that shape markets over time. That awareness is far more powerful than any short-term prediction. And that brings us back to the bigger picture. The world today moves faster than ever. Information travels instantly. Financial markets react in seconds, and global events can ripple across continents in minutes. Yet some financial principles remain remarkably consistent. Observing cycles, understanding psychology, following capital flows, and maintaining a calm perspective have guided thoughtful market observers for generations. Because ultimately, the goal is not to chase every headline. The goal is to build understanding, to learn how the pieces fit together, to recognize when the world might be entering a new phase, and to develop the kind of perspective that allows you to stay calm even when markets become dramatic. If this conversation about silver, gold, and the forces shaping the global financial system sparked your curiosity, then you're already doing something powerful. You're paying attention. And in a world where many people ignore the signals around them, awareness itself becomes a valuable asset. So keep learning, keep observing, and keep questioning the narratives behind the headlines. If you found this perspective valuable, consider supporting the channel with a like. sharing your thoughts in the comments about where you think the bigger trends are heading, and subscribing for more calm, thoughtful conversations about markets, money, and the forces shaping our financial future.